Over 100,000 children go missing in the UK every year, while as many as 460,000 vanish from the US annually. While these statistics look bleak, according to the UK charity Missing People, less than 2% of children will remain missing for more than a week, and although further statistics are unclear, there have been numerous stories over the last few decades of children disappearing for long periods of time, only to be found safe and well years later. Join us for today's episode as we examine 3 cases of children who disappeared and reappeared as adults. Melissa Highsmith. Melissa Highsmith always felt there was something off about her life, or more specifically, with the way she fit into her family. She was aware that her childhood was very sheltered, especially in comparison to her 2 brothers, and how she was never allowed to go out and play. She remembered the reason given for why she wasn't allowed to do so. Quote, "And my mother said the reason she sheltered me was because I was born at home and that I had brain damage." Melissa's relationship with her mother was very difficult. Reflecting back on her youth and their tenuous bond, Melissa recalled, "Me and my mum were never close, and the whole time I was there, it was a bad childhood." She eventually ran away from home at the age of 15, and despite knowing that something was different about her and her life, Melissa wasn't able to find answers for herself for decades. The truth was more mysterious than she could ever have imagined. In 1971, Alta Apentenko placed an ad in the local newspaper, searching for a babysitter for her young child. Alta lived with her 21-month-old daughter in Fort Worth, Texas at the time. A babysitter reached out to her and agreed to come and meet Alta at the restaurant where she worked, but she never showed. She then called back and explained that she was unable to make that meeting, but she really wanted the job. She claimed to have a big garden and cared for other children. Alta ultimately agreed to hire the woman and told her roommate that a babysitter would be by to pick up Melissa on August 23rd. The roommate recalled that the babysitter was well dressed and seemed pleasant, but she never returned with Melissa. The woman renamed the girl Melanie and raised her as her own, just 10 minutes away from the home of her biological parents. Melissa, who adopted her birth name after reuniting with her parents, stated, "It started to make sense. All the stuff I had wondered when I was little. Why is my mom like this? Why is she like this?" Melissa always thought that part of the reason why her relationship with her mother was so strained was because she'd hoped for a little third boy and was disappointed that Melissa had been born a girl. In 2022, Jeffrey Highsmith, now 73, decided to take a 23andMe DNA test, which showed that he had a connection to an individual who turned out to be one of Melissa's 3 children, whom she had given up for adoption. In the following days, Melissa's siblings set out to look for her, eventually tracking her down on Facebook. The 4 siblings reached out, but Melissa couldn't believe what she was reading. She recalled thinking, "They think I'm their sister. Oh, this is a scam." Confused by what the insistent Highsmith children were telling her, she reached out to the woman who'd raised her and asked her if the name Melissa Highsmith meant anything to her. The woman said no, but when pressured further, she claimed that someone had sold Melissa to her as a toddler for $500. She added that she knew she was Melissa Highsmith, the missing toddler. Melissa didn't believe that she was sold. She subsequently cut ties with her mother, blocking her on social media. Melissa later stated, "In my heart, I don't believe she bought me. I think she was the one that answered that ad and abducted me." She added, "Everything that I had known before the age of 15, before I left home, was a lie." 6 months after her siblings found her, a DNA test proved that Melissa Highsmith was indeed the missing toddler. Shortly afterwards, she attended court to legally change her name back to the one she'd been born with. She also learned that her birthday was not February 2nd, as she'd thought, but November 6th. Melissa stated that now, every February 2nd, she and her husband will celebrate the death of Melanie. She added, "My heart right now is full and bursting with so much emotion. I'm just really, really, really happy." The hunt for Melissa in 1971 went cold shortly after she was stolen, but after they were reunited, her family hoped to press charges against the woman who raised her. The Fort Worth Police Department stated, even though the criminal statute of limitations expired 20 years after Melissa's 18th birthday, the Fort Worth Police Department is committed to completing this investigation to uncover all of the available information concerning Melissa's abduction that occurred 51 years ago. There have been no updates in the case since. Mao Yin. Mao Yin was born on February 23, 1986. His mother, Li, doted on him, describing him as lively and adorable. She and her husband, Mao, dropped their son off at kindergarten every morning and picked him up again after work. She recalled, "Every day, after leaving work, I played with my child. I was very happy." During the 1980s, Mao Yin's mother worked for a grain exporting company and sometimes had to travel away from home in order to visit suppliers in the countryside. During these times, Mao Yin would stay home with his father. It was during one of these work trips in 1988 that Li received alarming news. She recalled, "All I got was a telegram with 6 words on it. Emergency at home, return right away. I didn't know what had happened." Upon her return home to the city of Xi'an in central China, she was told that her son was missing. Li recalled that she thought her son had just wandered off. She stated, "It didn't occur to me that I wouldn't be able to find him." Her husband explained that he had picked Mao up from kindergarten and stopped on the way home to get a drink of water for him at a small hotel the family owned. He stated that he'd left the boy for just a minute or two, and when he turned around, he was gone. Li believed that kind-hearted strangers had thought he was lost and would take him to the police station, but then hours turned to days, and the days to weeks, and there was no sign of their little boy. In the weeks after her son disappeared, Li used the family's own money to print out posters and flyers, handing them out at train and bus stations, pinning them in local shops, and even placing adverts in newspapers. The family were unaware at the time of how rampant child trafficking was within the country. The one-child policy, which meant that families could only have 1 child within the cities and 2 in more rural areas if their firstborn was a girl, contributed greatly to this issue. Boys were more desired than girls, as they would carry on the family name, care for their elderly parents, and take over any family businesses. As a result of this, the number of child abductions in the country, particularly those of little boys, increased greatly. Li eventually split from her husband following the loss of their child, but she never stopped looking for Mao Yin. Every Friday afternoon after work, she would visit surrounding provinces in search of her son, spending her whole weekend looking for him before returning on Sunday night, ready to go back to work on Monday. She investigated tips she received about boys resembling her son, but she never found him. She eventually grew so exhausted and became devastated by the constant dead ends that, on the advice of a doctor friend, she checked herself into hospital. After leaving, she began networking with other parents who'd lost their children. They eventually set up the organization Baby Come Home, as well as others. Over the span of 20 years, she connected 29 missing children to their parents. For decades, Li remained in limbo. She enjoyed reconnecting children and parents, but wished that one day she would have the opportunity to reconnect with Mao Yin. In April of 2020, she was finally given that chance. She received a call from Xi'an's Public Security Bureau, who told her that her son had been found. Earlier that month, a tipster had told the Bureau about a man who'd been stolen from the city years earlier. The tipster even provided a photograph of the man. Police used facial recognition technology to identify him as living in Chengdu City, and he was approached by investigators and asked to take a DNA test. On May 10th, he was conclusively identified as Mao Yin. On May 18th, 2020, Mao met his biological parents. By this time, he was 34 years old, with a wife, family, and even his own interior design business. Li recalled saying, "I don't want him to leave me anymore. I won't let him leave me anymore." The family's reunion was captured and broadcast on TV. Mao Yin was seen running up to his parents and embracing them. Later, Li learned that Mao Yin had been sold to a childless couple for the equivalent of £690, or about $840, 1 year after he was taken from his father. Notably, Mao Yin had seen Li on television before, and the images of her missing son who he thought resembled him as a child, but he never made the connection. It's still unclear who took Mao Yin when he was a boy, and he remembers nothing before the age of 4, when he was placed with his adopted family. He had no idea that the people who raised him were not his biological parents. Though Lee and her ex-husband would like answers, for now, they are content to find their son healthy, happy, and alive. Carlina White. On August 4th, 1987, Joy White and Carl Tyson took their 19-day-old baby, Carlina, to Harlem Hospital Center in New York City after they discovered she was running a fever. As the two parents stressed about their ill child, they were comforted by a woman they believed to be a nurse. Later, in the early hours of the morning, Carlina vanished following the 2 a.m. shift change. The infant had been receiving intravenous antibiotics when at some time between 2:30 a.m. and 3:55 a.m. her IV was removed and she was taken from the hospital. Though there were surveillance cameras, the system was down at the time that Carlina went missing. The only suspect was the nurse who'd comforted Carl and Joy, whom they discovered was not an employee of the hospital, despite the fact they had seen her around the hospital several times in the weeks before their baby's disappearance. A security guard said that someone matching the woman's description left the hospital at around 3:30 a.m. However, it did not appear that she had a baby with her. It is theorized that Carlina was hidden from view as the woman exited. The case of Carlina White quickly grew cold. Carlina grew up in Bridgeport, Connecticut, about 45 miles from where her parents had lived. She was given the name Najdra Nance, but preferred the nickname Nettie, and was raised by the woman who'd taken her from the hospital, Anne Petway. By all accounts, Petway had a turbulent upbringing herself. She was regularly beaten by her mother with belts and extension cords, and in 1977, when she was still a teenager, she spent several weeks in jail following a charge of larceny. Notably, her life of crime did not subside after she became a mother to Carlina. She was placed on probation at least 3 times during the little girl's upbringing, and once pled guilty to embezzlement after she stole from a department store she worked at in North Carolina. She also struggled with addiction. She explained Carlina's appearance in her life to friends by having already planted the idea that she was pregnant. She told them she would be gone for a little while until the baby was born, and most assumed that Carlina was the product of Petway's on-again, off-again relationship with a man named Robert Nance. Carlina graduated from school and eventually moved to Atlanta, Georgia with Petway. According to reports, she had been suspicious of her mother for a long time. She couldn't see the family resemblance, even though relatives referred to her as Little Anne, and was unable to get her driver's license as she didn't have ID. But despite niggling feelings, Carlina couldn't quite put her finger on what was missing between herself and her mother. It wasn't until 2005, when she got pregnant, that she became truly concerned. She needed her birth certificate in order to access healthcare from the state, but for days, Petway kept making excuses. Finally, she gave a birth certificate to Carlina, but it was determined by officials to be a fake. When Petway was confronted with this news, she admitted to Carlina that she was not her biological mother, and she claimed that her parents had abandoned her. 5 years later, at the age of 23, Carlina began trying to find where she came from. She initially restricted her search to Connecticut, not realizing that she'd been born in New York, but eventually widened the search. She scoured missing people websites and eventually discovered photos of an infant named Carlina White, whose information had been posted to the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. She noticed that the photos of Carlina resembled those of her own daughter, Samani. Driven by a need for answers, she reached out to the center's hotline and eventually made contact with Joy and Carl. Shortly afterwards, in January 2011, DNA confirmed that she was indeed Carlina White. Later that month, an arrest warrant was issued for Petway by the North Carolina Department of Correction for violating her probation following her conviction for embezzlement. 2 days later, on January 23rd, Petway turned herself in to the FBI office at Bridgeport. She had driven to Connecticut to arrange care for her son, who was her biological child. Petway admitted that she was motivated to steal Carlina from the hospital after she'd endured several miscarriages, and she was distraught at the idea of never becoming a parent. If convicted for kidnapping, she would face between 20 years and life in prison. She declined to enter a plea at her arraignment at the U.S. District Court for Southern New York in Manhattan, but on February 10th, 2012, she pled guilty to a federal kidnapping charge. Because she entered into a plea deal, it was recommended that she serve between 10 to 12 years in prison. She was 50 years old when she was convicted and sentenced to 12 years behind bars, and though her defense argued that she was a distressed and depressed woman at the time of the crime, the judge declined to give her leniency, arguing that Petway's actions had inflicted a parent's worst nightmare on a couple. Petway's sentence was served at a low-security facility in Alabama. She was released on April 14, 2021. Carlina, meanwhile, struggled to adjust to the situation. Shortly after meeting her parents, she became estranged from them, but appeared to just need time to process everything that happened. She noted that participating in nationwide interviews was particularly taxing, as she was expected to have a certain relationship with her biological parents, who were strangers to her. However, she soon began contacting them again, and as of 2014, she has maintained a relationship with both her mother and father. Though her legal name is Carlina White, she still goes by the name Nettie, as it was the name she gave to herself in childhood, rather than the one given by either her biological parents or by Petway. And there you have the facts. Please leave a comment with your own thoughts and reactions, and remember to like this video and subscribe to support the channel. Thank you for watching. Stay alert, stay safe, and I'll see you next time.